Rain lashed against the windshield. Mark squinted, trying to see through the downpour. The wipers worked furiously, battling the relentless torrent. It was a night to be home, tucked away safely, not driving on this deserted country road. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his headlights cutting through the darkness. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. His heart pounded a steady rhythm against his ribs. Suddenly a figure emerged from the gloom, a woman drenched to the bone, her white dress plastered to her frame. She stood by the side of the road, her arm outstretched, thumb extended in a desperate plea for a ride. Mark hesitated. Something about her seemed off. Her presence felt wrong, out of place in the desolate landscape. But the sight of her, vulnerable and alone, tugged at his conscience. He couldn't leave her stranded in this weather. He pulled over, the engine sputtering in the silence that followed. The woman stumbled towards the car, her long dark hair dripping water onto the cracked asphalt. He unlocked the door, and she slid into the passenger seat. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't turn to look at him. Her gaze remained fixed ahead, lost in the darkness beyond the windshield. Mark tried to make small talk, to break the eerie silence that had descended upon the car. "Where are you headed on a night like this?" he asked, his voice sounding unusually loud in the confined space. She didn't answer. He glanced at her, but her face was obscured by the shadows. A shiver ran down his spine, sending goosebumps erupting across his skin. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. They drove in silence. The only sound, the rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers and the low hum of the engine. The woman offered no directions, no indication of where she wanted to go. Yet, she remained a tangible presence beside him, exuding an unsettling aura that sent chills down his spine. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke, her voice a breathy whisper that seemed to coil around him like a cold draft. "Turn left here," she directed, pointing towards a narrow, overgrown lane he had missed. It led to an ancient, dilapidated house, its silhouette a jagged scar against the stormy sky. The paint peeled from its walls like scabs, and the windows stared back at him like vacant eyes. The house seemed to emanate an oppressive silence, as if holding its breath, watching their approach. The car crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "I live here." Section 4. The Search for Answers. The next morning, Mark couldn't shake off the memory of the strange encounter. He couldn't explain why, but he felt compelled to return to that eerie house, to make sense of the previous night's unsettling events. The storm had passed, leaving a fresh, earthy scent in its wake. The house looked even more sinister in the daylight, its decay more pronounced under the clear blue sky. He parked the car and approached cautiously, drawn by an invisible force. As he neared the porch, he noticed an old man rocking gently on a creaking swing. He seemed to materialize from the shadows, his presence almost as startling as the woman from the night before. Mark hesitated, unsure whether to approach, but the old man beckoned him closer with a gnarled hand. Section 5. A Daughter's Love. "You gave my daughter a ride last night, didn't you?" the old man asked, his voice a raspy whisper. Mark felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Your daughter?" he stammered, his voice catching in his throat. "But how?" The old man sighed, a weary sound that spoke of years of sorrow. "She died many years ago," he said, his eyes filled with a grief so profound it seemed to hang in the air around them. But she was always a kind soul, always helping those in need. He explained how his daughter had died tragically on a stormy night, hit by a car while walking home. "She always hated storms," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "She gets scared walking alone in the dark." A cold, hollow feeling settled in Mark's stomach. He suddenly understood the woman's damp clothes, her silence, her eerie presence. He had given a ride to a ghost. Section 6. Lingering Presence. Mark drove home, the old man's words echoing in his ears. He couldn't shake the image of the woman's pale face, her vacant eyes staring ahead. He had been a vessel, a conduit for her restless spirit, continuing her act of kindness even in death. He pulled into his driveway and turned off the engine. As he reached for his bag, his hand brushed against something wet on the back seat. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Turning slowly, he saw it. A small puddle of water, shimmering on the leather seat where the woman had been sitting. A tangible reminder of his ghostly encounter, a chilling testament to the fact that some journeys, even in death, are never truly over.